Hello everyone, this is Marvel Champions Deck Discussions, or MC Deck Discussions, and this is Abis Mall, though you're welcome to call me Abis. The primary focus of this channel is to discuss Marvel Champions decks, which is what we're here to do again today. Feel free to use the time steps to skip ahead to any part of the video you're particularly interested in. As a reminder, this is from the solo perspective. And as always, for those who haven't seen my videos before, I'd be glad to build a deck by request, so leave a comment saying so if that's what you'd like. And I'm happy to feature or mention other people's decks, so you're welcome to share your Marvel CDB name and decks in the comments for me or others to see. I don't mind at all if these videos become a resource for others to check out a number of decks. Today we have another deck from the 4-pack challenge, so as a reminder, or for those who haven't seen that before, I was watching another content creator who wanted to present decks that are for people who are on the beginning stages and have only collected a certain number of decks. So, and that would be up to 4 packs outside of the core set. So in this case, we're using Mutant Genesis, Next Evolution, Angel, and Iceman. I do want to say up front, if you happen to have the Rogue pack as well, then a great additional card that you could substitute for one of the other cards in here, possibly for one of the copies of Indomitable, would be Unflappable. That would be a natural add to this, and it would tend to produce a fair amount of card draw for you. With that in mind, though, let's go ahead and get into the rest of this. So first of all, notice it does say 8 packs required. But what Marvel CDB does, it lists a whole bunch of, all these slashes mean that those cards can be found in other decks. So it counts it as 8 packs, even though I really did only use 4 packs to create this deck. By the way, the person, the channel that inspired me to create these 4-pack, to meet this kind of 4-pack challenge, is The Masked Hero. So I highly recommend checking out his channel. He's got a lot of great videos, a lot of new player discussions, new player heroes, hero discussions. So if you are a new player, I enjoy his channel anyway, even as not being a new player. But if you are a new player, it's especially a recommendation to go to his channel and check it out. I built 2 different decks, actually, for this challenge when it comes to Iceman. And this is the Indomitable Snowman, and this is a protection deck. And I built this one to go through a certain number of villains. So let me go ahead and show you right now who those villains were that this was tested against. And this is both in Standard and Expert, so I play until I get a victory in Standard and a victory in Expert. And I went up against Morlock Siege, On the Run, and Juggernaut. And then later on, I ended up switching over to another deck to handle the later villains in this particular series of villains. They all came from a particular expansion, which is Next Evolution. So let's do a quick overview of the deck and then get into some of the strategies one might utilize while playing this deck. So notice we have quite a few allies in here to support Iceman, and most of those being X-Men, but we do, of course, have Nick Fury in this deck. I say, of course, I tend to use Nick Fury in the vast majority of my decks just because his card draw just assists the hero so much. One of the most important reasons for the allies is to thwart, and that's because we don't generally want to thwart with Iceman. So let's take a look at his abilities and see why we don't want to thwart with him. So Iceman, he has an interrupt. When Iceman makes a basic attack or defense against an enemy, attach a set-aside copy of Frostbite to that enemy. And Frostbite is an upgrade. Frostbite's an upgrade, but notice it's not listed in the upgrades here because it's set aside. So let's take a look at Frostbite real quickly. So Frostbite is a permanent. It's attached. It attaches to an enemy and gives that enemy -1 scheme and -1 attack. And it has a forced response after attached enemy activates or leaves play. Set this card aside, and there are 6 copies of this that are set aside and always available whenever you use Iceman's ability. So that means, so once again, he only gets to use this when he attacks or defends. So when it is your turn, you want to typically attack to be able to use these as much as possible. So let's go back to the deck. So if we look at these allies, they are focused on two things. So one of them is being able to thwart. So for example, we have Beak here, and Beak has a response. After you play Beak from your hand, remove one threat from a scheme for each X-Men ally you control. So a lot of times you will have other X-Men out here, so right away he's going to remove at least one, but maybe 2 or 3 threat just from coming in, and then can be able to thwart one more after that. The other I guess that would also mean we have Professor X, who can thwart for 3, and has another important aspect of him, which is that he can confuse the villain. He can also stun a minion or already an X-Men character, which is something I used Professor X for at times in this deck, because then that X-Men character I would typically choose would be the hero, Iceman, so that he could once again attack and attach another set-aside copy of Frostbite to an enemy, to that enemy. So being able to put multiple copies of Frostbite on an enemy is much more powerful than just getting one copy on them. And typically it would be on the villain. That's the one you're wanting to prevent the most, though here and there certainly you're going to want to put it on some minions too. So then another reason for the allies, and the reason we have so many of them, is to also protect Iceman's health, and that's done in a number of ways. So of course you can use them to block for him, but if we look at somebody like Nightcrawler, so Nightcrawler has this special ability. First of all, he has 2 attack and 2 thwart, only 2 health, but that's because his interrupt, I would guess that's because his interrupt is so powerful. When an X-Men character would take any amount of damage from an attack, spend an energy resource and return Nightcrawler to your hand, prevent all of that damage. So like you could continually do this. I actually have had decks where I have continually used Nightcrawler many times over and over again, but you can at least use this a number of times to completely protect all of your X-Men characters who are out, but specifically Iceman. And then Polaris does so in a different way. So we have Polaris, who is a 3-cost ally, 2 attack and 1 thwart. And the response for Polaris is, after Polaris enters play, give an X-Men character a tough status. So you can put that tough status on Polaris and use her to block, but more frequently I would tend to put that tough status right on Iceman and protect him from the villain. And of course, the allies are going to be used frequently to take out minions as well, while Iceman is often taking care of the villain, attacking the villain in order to put those upgrades of his onto the villain. So now let's check out the events that have been added. So we have in here Counterpunch. After your hero defends against an enemy attack, deal damage to that enemy equal to your hero's attack. So this takes advantage of the fact that we do also want to defend with Iceman, because that also puts those, once again, puts those set aside Frostbite counter onto that enemy. So we do like to do that, and as long as we're going to do that anyway, we might as well hit him in the face. Right? And we'll see that we can have some extra impact from that as well. And then we also have Powerful Punch. Again, this is a defense. When an enemy initiates an attack, deal 4 damage to that enemy. So this is real nice. Notice there are 3 copies of this. So this one's really nice for getting multiple instances of 4-point damage, which might go to the villain, but also often is used on the minions to just take them out before they even get a chance to attack, because this is a hero interrupt, right? So it's cost 2. It's a hero interrupt, and it's a defense. When an enemy initiates an attack, deal 4 damage to that enemy. So you can end up taking out an enemy if it has a few enough hit points, even before it gets a chance to actually finish its attack. Now, a quick mention about using Powerful Punch. This does not trigger his hero ability. So coming back to the hero ability, notice it's when Iceman makes a basic attack or defense against an enemy, attach a set-aside copy of Frostbite to that enemy. So that only includes his own personal attacks. And notice inherently he has 2 attack and 1 thwart and 2 defense. So there are ways in this deck that come right in his kit that help with both the defensive aspect of that as well as with the attack. So let's take a look at those, since those are related to why we might want to be defending so much with Iceman. So let's head over to the upgrades. So the first one is Cryogenic Perception. And notice that this is a superpower, and he has a hero response. After you resolve your freeze ability, exhaust this card, and then you can draw 1 card. If that card has an ice trait, you ready Iceman. So that means when he's attacking, you have the ability to use this, but also when he's defending, you could use this and end up readying him. So that makes him more viable to defend with than a lot of other characters. Oh, by the way, let's mention this real quickly. So if we go back to the set-aside copy of Frostbite, it is an interrupt. So when he defends against an enemy, he puts a set-aside copy of Frostbite on that enemy immediately. So it immediately decreases their attack and thwart by 1. Of course, if he's defending, it's an attack that he would decrease their attack by 1, making it even more likely that he will not take any damage, or at least he'll take very little damage. And then let's look at the card that impacts his other abilities, or his hero, built-in abilities, which is this adds 1 to his thwart, +1 to his attack, and +1 to his defense. And this has a forced response. After you change the alter ego form, shuffle this card into your deck. But because of all the protection that you have in this deck, as far as protecting his health with those allies and with some other ways to do that, he can stay on the hero side for quite a while. And so you can keep this card out for a long time. And so his every attack is dealing more damage, and he is less likely to take damage on when he defends, plus because now he would have 3 defense as well as 3 attack. So as long as we're on the upgrades, let's look at the additions in that part of the deck. So we have Armored Vest. So this adds even more to the defense, which is why when I mentioned earlier in the introduction that Unflappable would be a great add if you have Rogue. This just makes that even more true, but also helps to continue to protect Iceman so that he doesn't have to flip down as often when you don't want to. And then we have 3 copies of Indomitable. After your hero defends, discard Indomitable, ready your hero. One of the things I like about Indomitable is it just sits out there. And so anytime I can play Indomitable and just have that extra card, he'll be able to defend. And one of the things I like about this is, notice, unlike a lot of these types of cards, these upgrade cards, this doesn't say you can only have 1 copy out at a time. So you can actually have a couple of these, 2 or 3 of these out at one time, and just use one of them because it's not a forced response, it's just a response. So after hero defends, discard Indomitable, ready your hero. So allowing Iceman to continually ready so that he can defend again, or even more importantly in my mind, be able to attack again, makes this makes him work, makes this run, and makes it more fun. Frankly, I found this deck to be a fun deck, and part of it was constantly dealing damage so that you're moving the heroes, the villains' hit points down regularly so that the game doesn't last a real long time. Dealing regular damage can do a lot towards that because his own attacks aren't huge. So adding to that constant damage means that you can have fun with him dealing damage and not have long drawn out battles. So why don't we take a quick look at his own, his big attack, you might say. So notice with this attack that he has, it's a 2-cost attack, hero action, and you choose one. So deal 4 damage to an enemy and attach a set-aside copy of Frostbite to it. So very often one would choose to do that, but notice that is only 4 points of damage. And bigger than that, though, is deal 6 damage to an enemy that has Frostbite attached. So a lot of times you will have attacked with Iceman himself, dealing damage, and then you will have Frostbite attached, and then you do an additional 6 points of damage, which together those add up to a decent amount. But it isn't the biggest of, for this being the big attack, it's not the biggest of damage. He does have some more damage that he can do too. This one is actually not an attack. This is Ice Blast. So it costs 3. Choose a player, attach a set-aside copy of Frostbite to the villain, and each minion engaged with that player deal 3 damage to each enemy with a copy of Frostbite attached. So this is a good way to eliminate or reduce the health of a lot of the minions at the same time, and do some extra damage to the villain. But it's not a lot of damage that you're doing to the villain overall with his own attacks. So helping out with counterpunch and powerful punch ends up being a really nice way to get a lot of damage round after round on the villain. So now let's look at the player side schemes that have been added. So first we have build support, which allows each player to search their deck and discard pile for a support that costs 3 or less and put it into play. The targets for those will typically be the X-Jet, which is a resource generator, or team building exercise if the X-Jet is already out, which allows you to exhaust team building exercise, play a card from your hand that shares a trait with your hero, reducing its resource cost by 1. So this is an especially good addition to Iceman's deck because, let's look at it again here, right? Play a card from your hand that shares a trait with your hero, reducing its resource cost by 1. So it's not a resource generator, but it's kind of like having a 1-point resource generator for that special situation. But in this deck, that is the vast majority of cards. So if you have, and this is a hero action, so this will be on the hero side only. So let's take a look at his traits. So if we go back to Iceman, he has the Ice trait and the X-Men trait. So first of all of these X-Men, so the only one that's not an X-Men character of our allies is Nick Fury. So we can, since he is an X-Men character, we can use it to play all of the rest of these allies, plus the X-Jet is an X-Men support, so it could also reduce the cost of playing the X-Jet. And then the Ice, all of his cards, I'm pretty sure every single one of Iceman's own cards are Ice cards. So he can play almost every card in this deck, at least the vast majority of them, can be assisted with team building exercise, reducing cost by 1. So team building exercise is a particular recommend in his decks. All right, our resources are the typical energy, genius, and strength, which all give 2 resources to play a card. And then that leads us to, I think, just one other card. Oh, yes, I didn't mention these 2. So render medical aid. This one is when defeated, right? So you put it out there for 0 cost. Once you defeat it with, I'm talking from the solo perspective, just remove 3 threat. And each player heals a total of 5 damage from among characters they control. So you can distribute that to your hero plus any allies you would like to. And then for superpower training, we have 4 different targets here, and all of them being valuable targets depending upon what you already have in play. So typically my primary target, if it's not in play, is a card we mentioned before that's in his kit, Cryokinetic Perception, and that's the one that after you resolve the freeze ability, exhaust this card, and you draw a card. If that card has an Ice trait, ready Iceman. So being able to get that consistent card draw and possibly ready Iceman at the same time makes this, for me, the most valuable target for the primary target, if it's not already in play, for superpower training. Oh, I guess I should mention superpower training. This is a 1-cost one cost player side scheme. And once you remove the 3 threat from it, when defeated, each player may search their deck and discard pile for an identity-specific upgrade. So only identity-specific upgrades, and put it into play. But we do have other targets as well. We have the Power Belt. So this one gives Iceman 3 additional hit points, which he already has to begin with. Okay, so we can see he already has 11 hit points to begin with, so that'll put him up all the way to 14. And it also generates a wild resource for an ice card. And like I said before, I'm pretty sure all of his cards, except for this one, right? Item, tech, this one is not an ice card, but I think all of the rest of them are ice cards. Certainly the vast majority of them are. But we do have 2 other targets if you happen to have those 2 already in play. We mentioned Ice Slide before, that can give him +1 thwart, +1 attack, and +1 defense, at least while and as long as he remains on the hero side and not on alter ego side. But I've also used it, I've had the other cards in play, and I've also used it for Frozen Solid. So this is another card in his kit. It costs 3. Attached to an enemy. When attached enemy would activate, discard Frozen Solid instead, then attach a set-aside copy of Frostbite. This allows you to keep your copies of Frostbite out into play and just completely disables the villain. Of course, you can put it on, let's see, attached to an enemy, you can put it on anybody, but typically that would be the villain. So keeping those, this card is the card that allows one to continually build up those upgrades of his, which are, what is it called again? Frostbite. So his Frostbite upgrades, so he can keep building those up, which tends to be really fun if you build up 4 or 5 of them and completely make it so that, so that means like 2 activations, you have made the villain just incapable of doing much of anything against you, right? So because first cryogenic, whoops, not that one, Frozen Solid prevents that to begin with, right? So it's when the enemy would activate, discard Frozen Solid instead. So that's one activation. But then when you have all of these Frostbite upgrades on the villain, when it does actually make an attack or thwart, it has no impact because you've built up so many of these Frostbite cards onto him. And that leaves one more card that I haven't mentioned yet, which is Angel's Airy. So for Angel's Airy, which is as one of the supports here, so this is a card I really like when I have characters that are defending frequently, because the response for this card, and it only costs 1 to put out there, after you defend against an attack, place 1 fatigue counter here. So for Iceman, that's actually pretty cool, because not only is he going to be defending him for himself, but when you use Powerful Punch, you don't have to defend with him. This is a defense, so this also applies. So it's an attack and a defense. It deals 4 damage to an enemy, but it counts as a defense, so that also adds a fatigue counter here. So why do you care about fatigue counters? Well, when you do go down to the alter ego side, you don't have to, a lot of times you won't have to actually have him activate his own, right? So if we, oops, I didn't mean to click on that. So if you look at his alter ego here, he has a recovery of 4, which is a lot. But if you can avoid using that so that he is still able to attack once he goes back to hero form, all that much better. And Angel's Airy makes that much more likely to occur because it has an alter ego action. Remove each fatigue counter from here. Heal 1 damage from your identity for each fatigue counter removed this way. So you can just use that anytime when you go to alter ego side, and you can just, when you go back to hero side, you again start building these up again. All right, so that's it for the deck. So let's take a look at some of the notes. All right, and let's see how much of this has something that I may or may not have mentioned. I pretty much mentioned everything here. So strategy, the first strategy being you get consistent damage, you can have minion removal, plus you get some tough and stun removal. The stun removal meaning that you can attack, which will remove a stun, but then ready again afterwards. Although actually that means you didn't attack. Yeah, so I guess that doesn't apply there. Oh, right, that's why. So when you use Powerful Punch, and this would work with Counter Punch as well, but Powerful Punch in particular. So Powerful Punch, oh, not that one. Counterpunch, that is the one I meant. So that's 0 cost. So let's say you have a stun on you and you go to defend. After your hero defends against an enemy, deal damage to that enemy equal to your hero's attack. This is an attack. So you wouldn't succeed in making the attack, but for 0 cost, you would get rid of that stun, which would mean that you are then available to attack once you flip down to the other side. And then moving on to strategy 2, consistent use of Iceman's freeze ability. So we did mention this, but normally you might not be able to defend as much with Iceman if you want to be able to attack with him on your other turn. And the use of Indomitable really adds to that. You know, he already has some of that in his own with the cryogenic perception, which is the one that if he, after he resolves his freeze ability, which he'll do when he defends or attacks, you draw 1 card, and if it's an ice trait, you ready Iceman. So that makes him, you know, more likely to be able to defend. But having these Indomitables in here means he can defend regularly. And the more you are defending, the more you are putting onto the villain those frostbite cards. So that is it for this deck. All right, hope you enjoyed that, and I'll talk to you next time. Everybody have a good one. Oh, I don't usually think of saying this, but hey, if you're enjoying these videos, please like and subscribe. That'll help the channel to grow. All right, thanks a lot.